The early wind threaded through the old pine branches, carrying the harsh chill of the mountain forest in spring. The first light of day was not strong enough to chase away the somber gray stretching across the rocky hillside. Along a rugged trail, a tall man, clad in a worn, faded military jacket, quietly pushed a small wheelchair. Each step grew heavier, not because of the slope, but because of the weight in his heart. Daniel Ross, a former K-9 Special Forces soldier who had survived 3 deadly campaigns, was no longer the man who once roamed war zones with unwavering strength. His face was gaunt, his beard unkempt, his eyes weary, as if they had seen far too many things that no one should ever see. In the wheelchair ahead sat 6-year-old Emily, huddled inside a thin ash-gray coat. Her dark brown hair fell messily over her forehead, and her large round eyes looked up at her father, not with fear, but with confusion. "Daddy, why are we going so far away?" she whispered, her voice trembling in the early wind. Daniel didn't answer. His hand gripped the wheelchair handle so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Ahead of them lay the cliff's edge, where the rock fell away in sheer drops of dozens of meters. The opening was cold, silent, and suffocating, validating. Below, the forest looked like a black vortex. Daniel stopped just a few steps from the edge. The air smelled of earth, moss, and despair. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, eyes tightly shut. The hardened face of a soldier had become nothing more than a hollow, moldy shell. "I have no way out anymore, love," he muttered, as if speaking to his dead wife. "They killed you, and now they want to silence me through Emily. If I leave her behind, she'll suffer for the rest of her life. If I take her with me, at least she'll be at peace." He gasped for breath and stood up, placing his hands back on the wheelchair. Emily began to sense that something was wrong. Her small face went pale, lips quivering. "Please don't, Daddy." At that exact moment, from deep within the pine grove behind them, a roar rang out. Not human, but the guttural snarl of a seasoned K-9 combat dog. Rex, a Belgian Malinois who had fought by Daniel's side for years, raced forward like an arrow tearing through the wind, his body tense, fur bristling, eyes blazing like twin shards of molten steel amid the winter woods. Before Daniel could react, Rex clamped down hard on his pant leg, yanking him back with just enough force to break his grip on the wheelchair. The chair rocked slightly, but Rex immediately moved to block its path, lowering his head, growling in steady beats, as if to say, "Don't do this, not like this." Daniel stumbled back, hands bracing against the ground. His face reflected pure shock, as if waking from a long nightmare. Emily burst into tears, not from fear, but because of Rex. She cried out, "Rex, you came!" Rex stood his ground, still guarding the wheelchair, his tail flicking slightly, eyes never leaving Daniel. In those eyes were not just protective instincts, but memories, understanding, and loyalty that had never wavered. He had not forgotten being rescued by Daniel from the rubble in Syria. He hadn't forgotten the missions they survived together, walking the razor's edge between life and death. And he hadn't forgotten the woman who used to stroke his head each night when the family was still whole. The woman who vanished without a trace after one bloody night. Rex stepped closer to Daniel, gently placing something at his feet. A small metal object, stained with dried blood. Daniel picked it up. A battered silver necklace, scratched and worn, engraved on the back with the emblem of Bravo Squad. His eyes widened. His hand trembled. This wasn't his wife's. It belonged to someone else. Someone he had known. Someone thought to be dead, or who was supposed to be. In that moment, Daniel realized, it was not a person, but this dog alone, who had quietly tracked the clues all this time, bringing back a truth he had buried too deep in pain to face. And for the first time in months, Daniel Ross, the once proud soldier now lost and broken, looked into his dog's eyes, not to command him, but as if searching for a spark of trust, a flicker of hope, or maybe just the chance to be forgiven. The wind was still cold, but in Daniel's heart, A small fire had just been lit. "Thank you, Rex," he whispered. And Rex remained there, standing guard between the abyss and the shattered soul of the only friend he had ever trusted for life. The forest breeze still toyed with Emily's messy hair as Daniel bent down to pick up what Rex had dropped at his feet. A small object, ice-cold and speckled with dried blood. A dented silver necklace with a faded engraving of Bravo Squad, the special ops unit he once served in, thought buried along with his military past 3 years ago. Daniel turned the necklace gently in his hand. His eyes darkened, and the entire atmosphere seemed to be still. Memories he had locked away in a deserted drawer of his mind came flooding back like a rogue wave. Faces of fallen comrades, nameless missions, unclaimed orders of execution, and finally, Operation Raven's Echo. Bravo Squad had been ordered to withdraw after a mysterious raid, a mission with no clear target, ending in the squad's sudden dissolution without explanation. His hand shook, not from the wind, but because that old piece of silver now held an unspoken message from a ghost of the past. Rex had now moved to Emily's side, gently nudging her hand with his nose as if to reassure her. Her face softened a little. She reached out to pet him, sobbing, "You wouldn't let Daddy push me, right?" Rex couldn't speak, but the way he looked at Emily, with eyes as deep as the abyss, yet full of courage and tenderness, was the clearest answer. His tail gave a slow wag, not frantic like other dogs, but just enough to let her know she was safe. Daniel rose to his feet, still staring at the necklace. A scratch along the edge had revealed a symbol only known to those inside Bravo. 3 diagonal slashes representing the unofficial motto, "Silent, Sharp, Shadow." That emblem couldn't exist anywhere else, and certainly not in the hands of anyone who wasn't part of the team. Someone had left this on purpose, or worse, someone had died at the scene and dropped it during a struggle with his wife. He clenched his fist and tucked the evidence into his chest pocket. "You knew something," he muttered, as if speaking to his late wife, "and they couldn't let you live." At that moment Rex stood up, eyes fixed on the trail leading down the hillside. His ears perked, body leaning forward like an arrow on the bowstring. Daniel followed his gaze. No words needed. Rex had picked up a scent, a trace, maybe old blood, maybe the lingering presence of whoever was behind the tragedy. The dog let out a low growl, not of anger, but urgency. "Move forward, Daniel, don't stop now." That stance, firm as stone before the storm, choked Daniel with emotion. Few knew Rex had once almost been removed from the K9 unit for being unsuitable for combat, but Daniel had wagered his record to keep him, believing in qualities no test could measure, like unconditional loyalty and sensitivity to human pain. Now, Daniel understood more than ever. Rex wasn't just a soldier. He was a living witness, the last piece of a shattered bridge between past and present, the only soul still standing beside him when the world had turned away. He knelt and gently placed a hand on Rex's head, where the small scar on his ear remained from the last ambush they survived at the Afghan border. "Lead the way, brother," Daniel murmured. Rex turned, eyes meeting his one more time, with no need for words, the gaze of one who had seen the darkness but still chose to walk toward the light. And so they went, 3 outcasts in a world that had forsaken them, a broken father, a wounded child, and a dog who never stopped fighting, following the blurred trail of a truth buried too long in blood, smoke, and betrayal. As Rex led the way through the shadowed forest, dappled sunlight pierced the canopy like rays cutting through layers of dust in Daniel's memory. The rustling wind stretched out the forest's whispers, making each step heavier than the last. Inside his sleeve, the blood-stained necklace Rex had brought back seemed to burn through the fabric, like a silent burn from a past resurrected. They returned to the wooden cabin tucked into the hillside. Emily had fallen asleep from exhaustion, her head resting against Rex's back as Daniel carried her all the way home. On the floor, The gray coat covered her small frame, while Rex sat beside her like a black shadow on guard. His eyes stayed open, flicking to the door every few seconds, as if sleep was a luxury he refused, until Emily was safe. Daniel sat alone at the old wooden table, booting up a battered laptop. The wooden walls muffled the forest's murmur, but inside him, 1,000 echoes screamed. The same questions ran in endless loops. Who killed her? Why then? And why now, after all this time, did Rex find this? He logged into the old Special Forces internal system, covert access he had kept after discharge. It came at the cost of sleepless nights and buried trauma, but now it might be the only key to pull him back from the edge. The screen lit up with an outdated interface, surveillance video logs from the cameras around his house, archived and encrypted under military protocols. March 14th, 1 a.m., the official time of his wife's death, according to forensics. He clicked on the footage. At first, only foggy gray shapes and branches swaying in the wind. Then, a figure appeared in the top left corner. Briefly, but enough to freeze Daniel in place. A long coat, tall frame, right arm hung low, left leg bearing more weight, a gait Daniel knew too well. His heart stopped. Derek Kane. The name hadn't surfaced in 3 years. Officially, he had gone missing in action during Operation Raven's Echo. Nobody. No funeral. Just a cold line in the report. Presumed KIA. Killed in action. But that walk, those movements, Daniel couldn't mistake them. He rewound the footage, paused at the exact frame. The figure was crouched, approaching something behind the wooden fence, right outside the living room where his wife's body had been found the next morning. Daniel frowned and dragged the footage back a few more seconds. Then suddenly, Error 042, file corrupted. The screen went black. A crucial piece of data had been deleted. Not a glitch. Only someone with advanced military clearance and technical skills could erase that cleanly. Daniel's hands clenched. Derek had been there. He was at the house the night she died. And someone had tried to erase the proof. Rex left Emily's side and walked over. He raised his head, eyes fixed on his master's face, sensing the emotional quake shaking him to his core. Daniel placed a hand on Rex's neck, fingers brushing over the now darkened fur. "You always knew, didn't you, Rex?" he rasped. Rex didn't whimper. He just stood there, still, grounded, present. That compact, steady frame held a lifetime of combat, of devotion. This dog wasn't just a partner. He was a witness, a mirror for things Daniel couldn't see on his own. Rex's gaze slowly drifted toward the wooden cupboard, the one where Daniel kept an old, moss-green metal box. Inside it was a military-grade encrypted USB drive containing the full Bravo Squad archives, something Daniel had sworn never to open, because in it lived blood, betrayal, and the truths he had tried to bury when he left the battlefield for good. But now, everything has changed. He quietly opened the box. The yellow light reflected off a tarnished silver insignia, a battle-torn eagle, Bravo's symbol. He plugged the USB into the laptop. The secure interface blinked to life. A command prompt, one click, and the past began to breathe again. Derek Kane, First Sergeant, Primary Security Detail, Bravo's top sniper. His profile remained intact. 2 medals of honor, 1 major injury sustained protecting teammates. But in the footnotes, a new line in red. Removed from Operation Raven's Echo. Reason, classified, national security. Daniel leaned back, eyes closed. Pieces started to align. If Derek was pulled mid-mission, maybe he never left. Maybe he was kept. Maybe he switched sides. Or worse, maybe he was placed there from the start. Rex suddenly stood, emitting a low, sharp hiss. His ears perked, eyes locked on the small window. The wind shifted. A foreign scent. Daniel didn't ask. He stood and drew the curtain aside. Outside, partially hidden in the trees, sat an old pickup truck. The window was cracked just enough to reveal a shadowed baseball cap and the gleam of military-grade binoculars. They were being watched. Daniel stepped back, locked the door, and exhaled. Rex moved into a guard stance, tense but silent. No words were needed. They both understood. The game had begun, and the man in the shadows might be someone Daniel once called brother. Outside, the pickup truck remained still at the forest's edge, but Daniel didn't wait to see who it was. If they were already under surveillance, he had to stay one step ahead, before the final pieces of the puzzle were stolen again. By late afternoon, Daniel slid the necklace into his coat pocket and quietly shut the cabin door. Rex followed, close and alert. No commands needed. Emily was still sound asleep, watched over by Maria, a trusted neighbor. Daniel knew there'd be no second chances. And if anyone in the world could decode what this necklace meant, it was Clara Bennett. Clara had once been the field medic of Bravo, but she was more than gauze and morphine. She possessed a near photographic memory and intimate knowledge of the military's biometric and classified data systems. More importantly, she was his wife's best friend, the only person who truly understood the weight their family had carried in silence after the service. Clara lived in a small cabin under the pine canopy at the edge of Pine Brook, what Daniel had always called the last frontier between life and forgetting. As they reached her street, Rex's posture shifted, ears lowered, tail dropped. Not from fear, from reverence, as if he knew they were about to touch a raw nerve of memory. Daniel stepped up to the weathered wooden door and knocked 3 times. Moments later, the lock clicked, and Clara appeared. Her hair was still tied back in a neat bun, sharp eyes behind round glasses, but her face darkened when she saw Daniel, and even more when her gaze dropped to Rex. "How long?" she asked quietly, skipping greetings. 3 years, Daniel answered. She nodded, opened the door. No surprise as Rex slipped in behind Daniel, scanning the room with a veteran's discipline. He sniffed the air, thick with herbs, then sat quietly by the window, where the last rays of sun lit a photograph on the shelf. A photo of Clara, Daniel's wife, and a younger Rex, taken during their last vacation before Raven's Echo. The woman in the picture smiled wide, arms slung around Clara. Rex's head rested on her lap. Daniel slowly pulled the necklace from his pocket. "I need you to look at this." Clara took the tiny object, her eyes scanning its scratched, blood-speckled surface. Her gloved fingers brushed over it, then paused, sensing a near-invisible ridge. She pulled out a pocket microscope and a small tool set. Within seconds, a soft click. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a micro-SD chip wrapped in military-grade shielding. "My God," Clara whispered. "This isn't just a necklace." Daniel nodded. "She hid it. I think she knew she was being watched." Clara inserted the chip into a decryption device. The screen lit up with dense code, then froze on a file titled Exfil List Raven. She said nothing, just adjusted the resolution. A list of names appeared, individuals from various special ops units, most marked as disappeared or internally processed. Daniel's heart pounded. Derek Kane, special transfer. Note, keep silent. Clara swallowed hard. This is a purge list. People who knew too much, saw things they shouldn't, and were handled. Quietly. Erased. Daniel's voice cracked. "Is she on it?" Clara hesitated. Scrolled down, then stopped cold. Anna Ross, trace ID L7-X3. Note, contacted. Suspected knowledge of Raven recording. Action authorized. Every cell in Daniel's body turned to stone. His head buzzed. No more doubts. His wife didn't die by accident. She knew something. And maybe she tried to warn someone. Rex, silent until now, stood and stepped toward the screen, gently nudging the monitor with his snout, as if recognizing the name once spoken with warmth when she stroked his head. "My brave boy. Rex." Daniel placed a hand on Rex's head, bowing low, his voice gravel and broken. "They killed her because of us. Because of what she knew." Clara watched the 2 souls in front of her. One man, once the team's backbone, now a haunted shadow battling grief and truth, and one dog, neither whimpering nor raging, just standing firm, alive with presence. Two beings, different, yet bound by silence and unwavering loyalty. "I can't let this be buried anymore," Daniel whispered, as if to himself. "If Derek is alive, he's the first link, and I'll find him, whatever it takes." Clara nodded, her eyes hardened, now full of resolve. "Then we begin here." Outside the window, twilight bled across the pines, red as blood, like pieces of memory long buried, now clawing their way back. Rex raised his head, ears high. His shadow stretched across the floor, like a sentry guarding a truth about to be revealed. As the last rays of sunset slipped from Clara's windows, leaving behind a shadowy mosaic of tree silhouettes, Daniel knew time was running out. The data hidden in the necklace had awakened a truth buried too long, and in doing so, had also stirred the very force that wanted it silenced. They would come, if not tonight, then soon. Just 30 minutes after leaving Clara's home, Daniel was driving down increasingly deserted roads, heading deep into the northern woods, toward a forgotten place once used as Bravo's preliminary training ground. A worn wooden cabin, absent from any civilian map, with no signs, no internet, only forest, insects, and a silence so deep it could swallow even memory. Emily sat in the back seat, wrapped in a thick blanket. Her eyes were dark with fatigue, but no longer terrified. Beside her, Rex lay motionless, like a living blanket. Ever since that night on the cliff, Emily was no longer afraid of Rex. She seemed to find a wordless peace in him, perhaps sensing that, whatever happened, this dog would never leave her. The cabin emerged through a thin veil of cold mist, hidden behind dense brush. Daniel stepped out first, checking the entrance the old way, unhooking a chain lock hidden behind the third pine tree, lifting a wedge-shaped rock to retrieve the key. Everything was just as he'd left it years ago, as if the place had waited for him. He carried Emily inside, laying her gently on the old bunk bed and tucking her in. Rex entered last, making a slow, instinct-driven sweep of the space before curling up close to the bed. He didn't sleep, didn't move. Like an impenetrable gate, Daniel lit the fireplace with dry wood from the store shed. The flames flickered against the faded wooden walls, once adorned with tactical maps, now scarred with rusted nail holes. He sat beside his daughter, hands clasped tight to stop the trembling. "Daddy," Emily's voice came from behind him, soft as wind passing through wooden shutters. "Mom said this cabin had lots of deer, right?" Daniel turned. She was smiling, a thin, delicate smile, but real. Rex lifted his head, gently licking her small hand. Daniel nodded, voice hoarse. "Yeah, and deer love brave kids." She let out a faint giggle, then her eyes grew darker. "Don't leave me again, okay?" she said. "As long as you're alive, I'm not afraid of anything." Daniel couldn't speak. Those words, simple, innocent, shattered the last walls inside him. He pulled her close, holding her tight, and for the first time allowed himself to cry. Every tear was a piece of him breaking, a confession for having once stood on that cliff, ready to end it all, for both of them. Rex pressed up against them, his snout gently nudging Daniel's back. A silent reminder. You still have us. You still have Emily. And I'm still here. By the quiet firelight, 3 figures. One man collapsed beside his daughter, one thin girl clinging to her father's hand as if it might vanish, and one loyal dog lying protectively on the outer edge, formed a quiet, unshakable glow in a world thick with shadow. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat watching the misty window, hand resting on a loaded gun. Rex never left his post. His eyes never blinked at the slightest movement beyond the trees. This dog was more than a guardian. He was Daniel's second instinct. His living memory of every war survived. The last living bond Daniel could still believe in. And in that rare stillness, between the forest winds, the creak of old wood, the flicker of firelight, Daniel made a vow. He would uncover the truth. He would trace every erased file, every buried name, every staged death, until his wife's memory was brought into the light. And if Derek Kane was still alive, he would be the one to end the darkness Derek carried. Dawn didn't arrive in bright beams, but crept through veils of fog, pale gray light soaking into the wooden cabin walls, like a quiet reminder that the world outside still turned, even with secrets buried beneath its surface. Daniel sat silently by the wood stove, a mug of cold coffee in hand. He hadn't slept, not out of fear, but because his mind had fully reawakened, like a soldier hearing the horn of an old battlefield. Emily still slept under her blanket, breathing soft and steady like wind through treetops. Rex, ever vigilant, had sensed something near the cabin before sunrise. He stood by the door, unmoving, waiting. An encrypted email had arrived from Clara, a heavy file extracted from the blood-stained necklace chip. Daniel opened it on the same old laptop he used only for storing photos of Emily. As the screen flickered to life, the first line of text appeared, simple but immense in its implications. Helix Dynamics, Project Miraveau. Time seemed to freeze. He remembered, years ago, in a closed-door strategy session, the name Helix had surfaced, faintly, as a division responsible for special logistics during Operation Raven's Echo. But no one asked questions, because anything involving Helix bore a top security seal. Eyes only, Secretary of Defense level or higher. Daniel began scanning the files. Images, notes, detailed psychological assessments of soldiers subjected to emergency combat scenario simulations. Familiar names appeared, including his own, IDBR-5-27. A cold note. Responds well to hallucinatory visual stimuli, requires further observation. But the most painful entry was under a separate heading. Ross, Anna, Off-Grid Intelligence. Final note. Independent journalist, investigating links between Helix Dynamics and military operations. Accessed Class B data. Risk, high. Recommendation, neutralize. Daniel's throat went dry, like swallowing sand. His wife hadn't died from a random break-in, not an accident, not a consequence of his past, but a calculated execution, worded in technical jargon and signed by ghosts who'd never face the public. He leaned back, hands over his face, trying to stop the shaking rising from his core. But then, a faint sound by the door made him look up. Rex had returned, walking slowly toward him, gently nudging his leg with his snout. A small gesture, but it carried more weight than words. We're not done yet. Daniel rested his hand on the dog's head. Rex's fur was still cool with morning dew. Real, alive. In a world rotted by betrayal, this loyalty was all that remained true. And he knew. It was Rex who had brought the necklace back. Rex who had led him here. Rex who still tethered him to Anna's voice in the dark. He dug into the file's appendices and found another name. Bravo Unit, dispersed post-Echo. Some personnel reassigned to Helix Dynamics for PTSD Response Simulation Program. Daniel froze as familiar faces returned, including Derek Kane. Under his name, the note read, Cooperation accepted. Immunity granted for incident. Train 32. Operating under an alias. Crimson Vein. Crimson Vein, Daniel whispered. So he's not dead. He picked a side. And he knows too much. He closed the laptop and looked out the window. At last, the morning light broke through the fog. Emily stirred in her bed. Rex moved softly to lie beside her like he had never left. Daniel stood, fists clenched. This fight was no longer about the past. It was about the truth, about his daughter, about the soul of the woman who died in silence, and about the friend who never left, even as the world shattered. Helix Dynamics. A cold name, no longer invisible, and Daniel Ross, the man who once thought he had lost everything, was back, with Rex, and they would go to the end. The border wind cut like razors, sharp against skin and bone, but it couldn't pierce through Daniel's weathered coat. Nor could it touch the fire now burning within him, the need to confront Derek Kane. The data extracted from the Helix files was clear. The alias Crimson Vein had been traced to an abandoned warehouse less than 15 miles from the western border, one of Helix Dynamics' underground transfer points. No hesitation. Daniel tucked a handgun into his waistband, wrapped the first hard drive in shock-proof cloth, and looked toward Rex, who sat beside Emily like a silent shield. "I have to go for a while," he said, crouching by his daughter, his voice firm but tender. "Rex is coming with me, but I promise we'll be back before you wake up." Emily held his hand and whispered, "Rex always knows what's right. I trust him." That one sentence was all Daniel needed. No more looking back. The warehouse rose before them like a rusted iron cage, hunched between patches of snow and oil-stained ground. No alarms, no lights, just the silence of a place that had seen things never meant to be spoken of again. Rex stood next to Daniel, lifting his snout to sniff the still air. Then he froze. In those alert eyes, Daniel could tell. He had picked up something. Blood, metal, and something harder to name. Betrayal. Daniel gestured with a hand signal, an old one only he and Rex understood, and they moved together, silent shadows slicing through air heavy with guilt. The steel door opened. No sound. Inside, dust-covered shelves, old wooden crates, and at the far end of a ruined corridor, a silhouette. Daniel recognized him even with half his face hidden by shadows. Derek Kane. Changed, scarred, but those eyes betrayed every oath they ever swore. "Daniel Ross," Derek said, his voice low and dense like a blast suppressed. "You shouldn't have come." Daniel didn't answer. His hand tightened around the grip of his gun. "You know why I'm here." 1 second of silence. Then the world exploded. Gunfire shattered the stillness, each shot a discordant note in a deadly symphony. Derek was prepared. He had weapons and positions, but Daniel had instinct, memory, and most of all, he had Rex. The dog launched like a silver arrow through the air, with no bark, no hesitation, only cold precision forged through years of combat. Rex struck one of the 2 hidden shooters behind the oil drums, bringing him down with a clean hit to the ribs, then spun to avoid a second volley before sprinting back to Daniel, ready to defend him with his life. Daniel weaved through the aisles, eyes locked on Derek. The man was already retreating through a side exit, but in the scramble, a leather bag slipped from his shoulder, crashing to the floor. Metal clinked inside. Daniel pounced, grabbed the bag. He didn't need to look inside to know. It was another hard drive. Another missing piece, the roar of tires on concrete. Derek had mounted an old motorcycle and vanished before Daniel could land a clean shot. Only silence remained, echoed by heavy breathing and the sting of gunpowder in the air. Rex limped toward him, front paw buckling slightly. Daniel turned, and his heart clenched. A long gash stretched down Rex's side, not deep, but bleeding, bright red against the pale gray fur already matted with dust. Rex stared back, unshaken, still standing, still waiting for the next command. Daniel dropped to his knees, pulling gauze from his belt. "You're okay, boy," he whispered, voice tight with pain. "This time I'm saving you." Rex didn't whimper. He simply licked Daniel's hand. No complaint, no protest. Just silent companionship. By dusk, they returned to the cabin. The new hard drive was wrapped and secured. Rex lay beside Emily, who had just woken up, and smiled the moment she saw him, as if nothing had happened, as if he had never left. Daniel watched them, a wounded dog who never left his post, and a fragile little girl smiling after a long nightmare. And in that moment, he understood. There were things more powerful than revenge, things worth living for. Before dawn, the headlights of a jeep pierced the fog like quiet fire slicing through the forest's heavy night. On the damp wooden porch of the old cabin, Daniel knelt beside Rex's bloodied frame. The wound along the dog's side had deepened, despite his attempts to bind it with clean cloth and a belt strap. But Daniel was a soldier. He knew the truth. A cut like that, deep, angled, near a major vessel, was not a matter of luck. It was a matter of time. Inside, Emily sat curled on the rug by the fireplace, wrapped in an oversized hoodie, her eyes fixed on her four-legged friend. Under the flickering glow of firelight, her tiny hand rested gently on Rex's back, trembling in sync with his shallow breaths. Rex, despite the blood, the pain, the failing rhythm, was still awake. His deep brown eyes never left Emily. No whimpering, no flinching, just a stoic endurance so absolute it shattered Daniel's heart. This was no trained obedience. This was instinct, the instinct of a guardian soul, a warrior who stayed, not by command, but by love. Tires crunched over the wet soil. Clara had arrived. She entered the cabin and didn't need Daniel to say a word. She had once been a combat medic, the kind who could stop arterial bleeds while shells fell around her. But when she saw Rex, his blood-soaked coat, his eyes still shining with a quiet apology, her heart skipped a beat. Clear the table. Sterilize everything. Stoke the fire, she ordered. Daniel transformed the dining table into a field operating surface, covering it in medical-grade towels. Emily stood beside him, steadier than her age should allow, her small hands never leaving Rex. Clara leaned in and whispered as she prepped the anesthetic. "Stay here. Talk to him. Your voice. It'll keep him strong." The surgery began. Clara's headlamp illuminated the torn side, an angled slash from cement or shrapnel tearing through skin and muscle. A secondary vessel had ruptured. Bruised tissue, a small metal shard, possibly from a bullet casing, lodged dangerously close to the artery. If it wasn't removed, it would rot. If her hand slipped, it would rupture. The margin between life and death lay on the tip of her scalpel. Sweat trickled down Clara's face, despite the icy air. Daniel held Rex's head. Emily clutched his hind leg. Rex looked at both of them with a gaze that whispered, "It's okay. I'm not going anywhere." After nearly an hour, Clara stitched the final thread, wrapping the wound in antiseptic gauze. A single tear dropped from Daniel's eye onto Rex's back. Not from grief, but from gratitude. "He's going to be okay," Clara said, voice hoarse. "I got the metal out. It didn't cut the artery." She collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. "One life for another," she murmured, eyes on Daniel, then Emily, as if to remind them that Rex hadn't just saved a life. He saved a family. By morning, the first light spilled across the cabin floor. Rex hadn't moved, but his breaths were steady. Emily hadn't slept. Her eyes were dark but shining. She leaned down and whispered into Rex's ear, "Sleep now, my hero. When you wake up, we'll play tag again. And this time Daddy's playing too." Daniel watched the two of them lying side by side. A little girl who once couldn't step outside her room after her mother died, and a dog who had charged through gunfire to protect him for years. In the heart of a cold wilderness, Daniel understood something profound. Love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it breathes. Sometimes it lies beside a child and never leaves. Quietly, he turned inside and opened the drive taken from Derek. The sun had barely risen. The enemy had yet to fully reveal its face, but he was no longer alone. He had his daughter. He had Clara. And he had Rex, the four-legged warrior who chose life, to keep fighting for what was right. The morning after the grueling surgery, the first light of day crept through mist-draped forest trees, a thin breath of hope brushing the dusty cabin window. Inside, Rex's steady breathing formed a quiet rhythm, lulling Emily into sleep beneath a blanket near the fireplace. His wound was cleanly bandaged, but his deep brown eyes remained alert, watching every movement in the room. He was no longer a soldier on the battlefield. He was a sentinel, one who had chosen to live for what remained. Daniel sat at the table. In front of him, the hard drive taken from Derek. His battered military laptop was slowly booting up, the fan whirring quietly. Clara, still there, poured a mug of cold coffee, her glance flicking briefly toward Rex. She didn't speak, but Daniel knew. They were thinking the same thing. If what was inside that drive was real, then the battle had only just begun. The decrypted preview showed a suspicious list. Former soldiers, agents, and intelligence officers, all once tied to something called Project Mirror. Most were marked missing or retired, but strangely, almost none left a trace, as if they had never existed. Daniel exhaled, fingers running along the drive's edge. His instinct told him, this wasn't an accidental leak. It was a buried warning, something Derek had carried with him. Whichever side Derek now stood on, he had made sure Daniel found it. "We need someone who understands this system," Clara said softly, resting a hand on his shoulder. "And I know someone." A weathered gas station sat on the western outskirts of town. Forgotten since the new freeway diverted traffic years ago. Now overgrown with vines and crowned by a crooked sign, it looked like a question mark on a nowhere map. Travis Hale, an FBI agent with internal affairs, agreed to meet there after Clara sent an encrypted signal through the old military network. Daniel didn't trust easily, especially anyone still tied to the federal system. But Clara assured him, if anyone had ever quietly followed the same trail his wife once walked, it was Travis. Rex walked beside him. His stride was uneven, still recovering, but unwavering. Daniel had tried to leave him behind. Each time Rex stood at the door, silent, resolute. His eyes said it all. "I've followed you through war. I won't abandon the final fight." The black SUV pulled up just as sunlight touched the pine peaks. Travis stepped out, tall, lean, and unreadable. A charcoal gray coat, military boots, and a faint scar tracing his left cheekbone. He walked slowly, eyes scanning the surroundings until they landed on Daniel. And on Rex. "Daniel Ross," Travis said first, his voice dry and sandpaper low. "I thought you were dead in Afghanistan. Or missing, at least." "Maybe," Daniel muttered, never looking away from the pistol half concealed in Travis's coat, like the others on that list. A brief, silent tension passed like air holding its breath. Then Travis glanced down at Rex, and when he saw the white bandages wrapped around the dog's ribs, his expression shifted. Not pity. Recognition. "He was at Camp Echo, wasn't he?" Travis asked, voice quieter now. Daniel nodded. "Bravo K9? Rex, born to save lives? And he's done it more than the whole squad combined." Travis sat on a half-broken bench, sighing, weariness settling into his eyes. "I once saw a K9 like him take a bullet for a kid just weeks before discharge. Kid lived. The dog didn't. After that, the kid vanished too." Daniel slid the hard drive toward him. This came from Derek Kane. He carried the list. Travis opened his laptop and connected the drive. Lines of code blinked, then gave way to a grim interface. His brows furrowed. "Project Mirror," Travis read slowly. "Experimental emotion control trials on Spec Ops, using drug-induced neurotransmitter stimulation, enhanced with biofeedback implants. Cancelled 3 years ago. But this list doesn't lie." He looked up. "Your wife sent me an anonymous report. I believed her, but I had no proof. Until now." Travis stood. His gaze was no longer detached. It was that of a soldier recognizing another. "I won't give you orders. But if you're still in, so am I." Daniel didn't answer right away. He turned to Rex. The dog now sitting tall, eyes fixed on Travis like making one final assessment. A moment later, Rex stepped forward and sat beside Travis, tail flicking gently. A silent nod. A vote of trust. Travis smiled faintly. "I see. He just cast his vote." Before parting, Travis handed Daniel a slip of paper with GPS coordinates, handwritten, Echo 12 Compound, where it all began. He gently touched Rex's head, not like petting an animal, but like a soldier greeting a comrade. Rex didn't react, just tilted his head slightly, eyes steady. And Daniel knew, once again, This dog had chosen to forgive the world. The meeting with Travis had left more than a location. It had sparked something far rarer: trust. A flicker of belief Daniel thought had died the night his wife fell. But like every fragile flame, as soon as it ignited, darkness stirred. Back at the cabin, Daniel had just begun verifying the coordinates Travis gave when the laptop screen flickered. GPS ping detected. The hard drive's signal had been traced. Helix had found them. He had minutes. Daniel sprinted outside. Clara was inventorying leftover supplies from the surgery. Emily still slept soundly in the small side room, face aglow beneath the flicker of an oil lamp. Rex sat at the doorway, ears perked, then suddenly lunged toward the tree line. A second later, click, the cold sound of a silencer. Daniel froze. They're here. No commands are needed. Rex bolted upright. The softness in his eyes vanished, replaced by steel, a K9 who could smell death in the air. Daniel handed Clara a sidearm. North Trail, stay low, fire smoke if you reach the ridge. Then he ran to the small room, scooped Emily into his arms. She stirred, confused, and placed her beside Rex. The dog leaned down, inhaling her scent one more time, memorizing it. Emily clutched his neck, sensing the urgency. She didn't ask. She understood. Take her through the old tunnel, Daniel whispered, forehead pressed to Rex's. You know the way, and how to survive. Rex barked once, short, sharp, and turned, bounding down a moss-covered trail. The training tunnel from their Bravo days still existed, buried beneath the forest. A hidden exit no one but old soldiers and loyal dogs would remember. In the forest at night, the chase unfolded like a nightmare without light. Shadows with suppressed weapons slithered through the tall grass, radios crackled with cold-coded signals, and infrared beams swept across tree trunks. But in that darkness, there was a creature even quieter, faster, and more intelligent. Rex ran close beside Emily, his nose glued to the ground as if reading a map through scent. Whenever a branch blocked the path, he gently veered off, skillfully avoiding any sound. Each time he heard an unfamiliar rustle, Rex froze, pressing Emily against the trunk of a tree, his eyes gleaming like twin sentinels in the heart of the woods. Emily said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply clung to Rex's back, her small hand gripping the makeshift harness Daniel had tied to help her balance. That dog was the only pillar she had, as the darkness closed in around them. Once, when a pursuer nearly spotted them through a patch of reeds, Rex quietly diverted to another direction, waited until the footsteps faded, and only then continued leading the way. Each step he took wasn't just an escape. It was an unspoken promise. Emily will live, at any cost. Finally, after more than an hour navigating the forest, Rex stopped before a moss-covered mound. He scratched quickly at the soft soil, the entrance to a training tunnel, a wooden hatch so well disguised that only former Bravo operatives would know how to find it. Daniel had taken Rex through this tunnel dozens of times during light deprivation drills, and now the dog's memory had become the key to survival. Rex pressed his snout into the wooden seam and pushed hard. The door creaked open, revealing a black descent that seemed to swallow all light. But Emily didn't hesitate. She trusted Rex, as she always had since the first time that dog rested his muzzle on her lap in the hospital. Let's go, she whispered. Rex jumped down first, then turned back, as if to give his final confirmation. Emily slid in after him, her hand clenched tightly around his fur. The door closed behind them, leaving only darkness and the warmth of the most loyal being she had ever known, her unyielding protector, the silent gatekeeper of her fragile life. Above ground, Daniel held back the mercenaries with suppressive fire. The gunshots rang painfully in his ears. He didn't need to win, just to buy enough time for Rex and Emily to escape. And in one fleeting moment between muzzle flashes and the footsteps of their pursuers, he felt something strange, a brief, deep peace, because he knew that whatever happened to him, Rex would never let her die. When the last gunshot dissolved into the night forest, Daniel stood still among the gunpowder haze and rain-soaked leaves, his heart thudding with a suffocating rhythm. It wasn't fear. It was the moment he realized something. Rex had done it. Emily had escaped. And for the first time in months, Daniel felt he was no longer alone. In the moonlight glinting off the still warm barrel of his rifle, Daniel retreated toward the edge of the woods. He had to move. He needed to find the last person who might confirm everything. Someone he once believed had died in a covert op outside Fallujah. Michael Shaw. Michael had been Bravo's best sniper. Quiet, razor-sharp, unshakably loyal. On that final mission years ago, he disappeared after an explosion. Nobody, no signal, no official death report, just a name quietly erased from the roster. A ghost in the margins of military records. According to a lead from Travis, Michael was living off-grid near Arrowhead Lake, a place shrouded in mist year-round, where maps offered no clear roads and no clear answers. Daniel arrived just after the rain stopped. The damp earth steamed like a battlefield. An old cabin lay hidden among dying maples, lifeless at first glance. But Rex, wound now carefully redressed by Clara and still limping from injury, stopped suddenly. His nose dropped to the ground, then lifted toward a gap in the wooden wall. His eyes lit up, not with danger, but recognition. Daniel understood immediately. A man like Michael wouldn't survive 4 years off-grid without traps. But if Rex recognized the scent, it meant they'd met before. And the scent wasn't laced with gunpowder. "Michael," Daniel called out, voice firm but calm. "It's Ross, Bravo 4. If you're alive, don't shoot." A long silence, and then the wooden door creaked open. A man appeared, bearded, hollow-eyed, coat frayed at the shoulders, still holding his old M24 rifle steady. But his eyes were the same sharp eyes from before, only wearier now. And when he saw Rex, those eyes softened. "There are only 2 things that never betray trust," Michael said quietly. "Rex, and a soldier who returns without lies." The room inside was dark and damp, coated in time's dust. Rex lay down by the door, stretching out protectively. Daniel sat across from Michael and placed the hard drive between them. "Derek's alive," he said, "and my wife was killed for getting too close to Helix. I need to know, what was your last mission?" Michael didn't speak at once. He poured coffee into a chipped mug, his scout-trained hands still steady, though slightly trembling. 3 years ago, he began, voice heavy as if echoing from a tunnel. "I was given a black directive, neutralize an internal threat to national security. The target was a journalist. Her name was—" "Elena Ross," Daniel said, eyes closed. Michael nodded. "I tracked her for 2 weeks. I saw the articles she hadn't published. I knew she was your wife. And I knew, if she was right, then we'd been lied to since the day we wore a uniform." Daniel's hands clenched until the veins rose. "I refused, reported back that the target had left the area. 3 days later, they sent someone else. I knew if I didn't vanish, I'd be next." He leaned back. "So I faked my death, and I've been living like a deserter ever since. But I've watched the news and waited for someone to break the silence. I thought that someone would be you." Daniel stood, voice low and hoarse. "I don't have a choice anymore." Rex lifted his head and gently nudged Daniel's hand. A reminder, quiet and strong. "You're not alone." Daniel turned to Michael, his stare hard as tempered steel. "Do you still have any records?" Michael silently opened a weathered wooden chest. Inside was a worn leather notebook, encrypted tapes, and photos taken through a sniper lens. Shots of Derek, Clara, and a man Daniel didn't recognize. The leader of Helix. "And this," Michael added, pulling out a broken chain. "Part of the encryption device your wife once hid in her journal. The other half must have been what Rex brought back that day." Daniel held it. Cold as dead metal. But within it, he knew, was the pulse of truth. Rex gave a low growl. Not of pain, but as if to say, "Time's running out." The first light of day filtered through the rain-soaked canopy, casting long shadows across the muddy forest floor. Footprints still fresh, claw marks sketched in soil, and trails of fractured earth leading toward a hidden place. Rex walked beside Daniel, every movement measured, as if the dog himself were lost in thought. Since leaving Michael's cabin, Daniel hadn't spoken a word. But that didn't matter. Rex understood. He didn't need words to feel the shift in his master's breath, his gaze, the moment a soldier realized that truth was no longer just pain. It had become duty. They returned to their forest hideout, where Clara and Emily were waiting, within weather-worn wooden walls, beneath a flickering bulb suspended by wire. The cabin had transformed. No longer a shelter, it was now a covert operations hub, where buried secrets were being unearthed from beneath the dust of classified archives. In a corner, Emily was piecing together a puzzle made from old cardboard scraps. She leaned into Rex, who lay curled around her legs like a warm, living shield. Clara sat close, eyes fixed on the laptop screen as decryption software worked line by line. Nearby, Travis, the FBI agent whose belief in justice had never faded, stared into a satellite map, murmuring coordinates scattered across the country. When Daniel stepped inside, all sound ceased, but the silence felt like an invisible handshake. They were no longer just survivors. They were a unit. 4 people and 1 dog, an unofficial front line, but unshakable. Travis spoke first. "The search phase is over," he said, voice even, eyes sharp. "Now it's time to peel back the layers of helix dynamics." He tapped a key, and the screen displayed a tangled web of data lines, connections between defense budgets, shell corporations, military hospitals, independent labs, and trauma treatment centers. The names of the missing appeared one by one. Scouts, signal officers, medics, and independent journalists once brave enough to speak. "They didn't just kill people," Travis continued. "They conspired to erase every trace, off maps, out of memory, even from official government records." Daniel clenched his fists, but Rex gently nudged his leg with his nose. A small gesture, yet it spoke volumes. "Hold your breath steady. Others still need this truth to live." Michael, seated near the wall, opened an old metal box. Inside were notebooks, tapes, and long-lens surveillance photos, the evidence he had gathered in 4 years of exile. "They assigned me to kill your wife," he said, eyes locked on Daniel. "I didn't, and now I'll testify." Clara unrolled a medical report, encrypted and worn. Elena Ross's last transmission before her disappearance. She found Helix was manipulating combat emotions, using neurostim triggers and drugs. They weren't healing PTSD. They were weaponizing it. Emily looked up at the room. She didn't understand it all, but her eyes tried. And as always, Rex tilted his head, then gently licked her hand. "I'm still here." After nearly 2 hours of cross-referencing data and assembling leads, they finalized a meticulous plan. Clara would back up all decrypted data into 3 encrypted bundles, 1 to the national paper Elena once worked for, 1 to an independent senator renowned for government oversight, 1 to a global anonymous archive. Travis would initiate an emergency hearing in Congress based on Michael's testimony. Political resistance was inevitable, but the timing was now. Daniel and Michael would serve as decoys, drawing Helix's attention and diverting its eyes from Emily and Rex. They were no longer just witnesses. They were living evidence. And Rex, the only one who could do what no one else could, would lead the way. That night, the cabin did not sleep. Clara soldered circuit boards by firelight. Travis typed authentication strings into multiple systems. Daniel cleaned his old sidearm, his fingers pausing at an engraving. For Elena. For truth. Rex lay near the window, ears alert through eyes half closed. The wind whispered through wooden seams, but his breathing remained calm, a silent oath in the dark. Across the room, Emily slept, her hand clutching a laminated photo of her mother. Beneath her small bed, Rex slowly crept closer, laying his head gently at her feet like an unmoving pillar. He needed no orders. He already knew. The war had only just begun. That morning, the air in the forest was as light as a promise. After countless days of exhaustion in darkness and danger, the little cabin finally embraced a peaceful dawn. In the modest room, Emily slept soundly in Clara's arms, while Rex, the loyal dog who had survived death more than once, lay curled beside the bed, one paw gently touching the edge of her blanket, as if to affirm, "I'm still here. I'll always be here." Daniel stood at the window, eyes following the first rays of sunlight piercing through the trees, casting dappled light onto the ground. Last night, Travis had left with the final copy of the data and was on his way to Washington. They had done everything they could to expose the truth. All that remained was waiting and protecting one another. But in the world of those who have known war, peace is always the most fragile thing. Just a breath later, darkness returned, this time like a lightning strike, and more brutal than ever. Around 10 in the morning, Clara decided to take Emily to the local clinic to have a scratch on her back checked and to redo a physical therapy session. Daniel had planned to go with them, but a weak signal had just appeared on Michael's decoder. He stayed behind to investigate. The door closed, and the engine hummed to life. Rex stood on the porch, watching the SUV disappear into the forest, his eyes never leaving. 17 minutes later, the cabin's internal alert system lit up red, the only encrypted signal for "Lost contact in a danger zone." Daniel shot to his feet. His heart skipped a beat. No response from Clara's phone, no GPS signal from the vehicle. The soldier in him surged awake. But just then, a noise turned him around. Rex, the dog, bolted out the door like a streak of white smoke. No command, no hesitation. Nose drawing in air, fur bristling, and a short, guttural growl rising from his throat. A sound Daniel had never heard in all their years fighting side by side. The growl of pure rage. Daniel followed. Every step felt like a crushing weight on his soul, because deep down, he already knew. They'd been found, and Helix had struck at the one weakness he still had. Emily. Near the outskirts of town, Rex let out a sharp, piercing cry and skidded to a stop, claws scraping the dirt road. In front of them stood the clinic, shattered glass doors, flickering lights, and droplets of blood trailing down the hallway. Daniel burst inside. A nurse lay unconscious at the reception desk. Further in, the physical therapy room's door was wide open. Clara and Emily were gone. On the blood-smeared white tiles lay a pale pink hair tie, frayed and stained, a faint trail of blood leading toward the back exit. Daniel dropped to his knees. Hands trembling, he picked up the ribbon, still faintly scented with his daughter's hair. Everything inside him cracked. "Emily," he whispered, barely a sound. A call unanswered in a silence cold as the grave. But then, what held him from falling apart was a low growl at his side. "Rex!" The dog stepped back and lowered his head, eyes blazing like twin embers, nose pressed to the floor. Blood, gasoline, and that one unmistakable scent, skin, fabric, breath, Emily. In a blink, Rex turned and darted west, toward the deep woods, where the old training ground Daniel had marked on the coded map once lay. Daniel snapped out of it. No weapon, no plan, no second thought. He ran, because at the end of that trail of blood was everything he had left in the world. The forest path was narrow. Branches slashed his face. Mud flew up to his collar. Rex led the way, never once stopping. He wasn't just a working dog now. He was the spirit of a lost mother. The cry of Emily stifled her fear. He was Daniel's own heart still beating for something beyond justice, love, and the instinct to save the child who had once been his last reason to survive. The wind howled above the trees. Clouds thickened. The air was filled with iron, burnt fuel, earth, and blood. Rex halted at a moss-covered stone, eyes locked on a half-open hatch between two boulders. His growl rose, not a warning, but a vow. Daniel stood beside him, breathing hard. Hands clenched his backpack straps, jaw tight. Heartbreaking. "We're bringing her back, Rex," he whispered, "even if we have to walk through hell." Rex turned to him, and without words, without command, they stepped into the dark. Night wind slashed through ancient pine branches, carrying the biting chill of steel and the sharp scent of burning. The security system set ablaze to ward off intruders. But Daniel didn't stop. Every stride through the forest was a ragged heartbeat, every breath a stab in his ribs. Beside him, Rex didn't run. He flew like a silver arrow. Their muscles were tight, body streamlined, their eyes cold and focused. No signal is needed, no hesitation. In that canine's gaze lived one thing only: Emily. At the forest's edge, Daniel stopped, panting, gripping the straps of a backpack loaded with ammo, water, and a locator. Below, 2 stories down in a valley, was a remote iron compound, surrounded by electrified fences and rotating security cameras. Helix's mercenaries, black armored shadows with rifles slung across their backs, patrolled the perimeter like ghosts of death. In the center, inside a lit room, Daniel saw the tiny figure trembling in a faded hospital gown. Emily. His knuckles whitened around his pack. He sank to one knee behind a tree, eyes fixed on his daughter. The flickering lights cast pale halos around her tangled hair. Her legs didn't move, but her shoulders twitched with every gust through the broken wall. She wasn't crying. That was what broke Daniel the most. She had already learned the silence of fear. Rex flattened beside him. His gaze swept across the steel fence and locked on a patch of newly disturbed dirt. A buried tunnel? Maybe. Rex gave a low whimper, barely audible, only Daniel could hear. He leaned in. Rex's eyes spoke clearly. "Trust me. We can get in." No hesitation. Daniel nodded. Rex led them, weaving through trees, sliding through a shallow ditch, then vanished into a bush. Seconds later, a hole appeared, an old ventilation shaft, just wide enough for one man and a dog. Inside, the air reeked of rust and mold. Daniel's steps echoed against the damp concrete like the pounding of his heart. Rex moved silently ahead. No bark, no tail wag, ears high, the stance of a warrior entering enemy territory. Near the end of the tunnel, Rex froze. He turned, nose to the air, then a soft growl. Blood. Emily's blood. They were close. A crack in the wall opened into the back of the compound. A faint sound. Flashlight beams sweeping. Daniel flattened, signaling stillness. But Rex was already circling. A muffled snarl, and seconds later, a guard collapsed without a sound, throat bitten at the precise point to knock him out cold. Daniel burst into the holding room. The door was unlocked. He threw it open. Emily looked up, eyes wide. "Daddy!" He rushed in, swept her into his arms, untying ropes, whispering over and over, "I'm here. You're safe now, baby." But then, metal clanged. A guard stepped out from behind a curtain, rifle raised. The trigger pulled. Everything slowed. Daniel turned to shield Emily, ready to take the bullet. And then, a blur of motion. Rex! The dog hurled himself into the line of fire, jaws locking onto the guard's arm, deflecting the shot, but not fast enough. The bullet hit Rex's left side. His cry tore through the night like a blade. He collapsed, eyes wide, breathing shallow, body twitching. Blood soaked his snow-white fur. Emily broke free from Daniel, crawled to him, and wrapped her arms around his neck, sobbing, "No, please don't go. I'm here now. Don't leave me, please." Daniel was still. He knelt beside them, one arm around his daughter, one hand gently stroking Rex's head. His vision blurred. Rex's breathing slowed, but his eyes stayed open, locked on Emily, saying, "She's safe. I did it." No time left. Alarms screamed. Helicopters circled. Daniel wrapped Rex in his jacket, lifted Emily, then hoisted the wounded dog, his four-legged comrade, onto his shoulders. With each step forward, the wind howled in his ears, but inside, a strange warmth burned. because Rex was still alive, and his daughter was no longer afraid. "We're going home," Daniel whispered, choking back a sob. "As long as we're breathing, there's hope, I swear." And in the night forest, where despair once reigned, 3 souls walked out of the dark. A father, a little girl, and a loyal dog. They didn't just survive the edge of death, they redefined what loyalty, love, and salvation truly mean. Dawn had barely broken. Silver threads of mist still clung to the pine branches when Travis's off-road vehicle tore through the emergency medical facility gates. Daniel hadn't even changed out of his blood-stained jacket. One arm cradled a sleeping Emily, the other held tightly to Rex, the dog breathing faintly in his arms. Clara and Michael were already at the entrance. They said nothing. Their eyes met, then moved instantly to action. Clara directed Daniel to lay Rex on the long wooden table set up for first aid. Her eyes never left the wounded dog, the wound on his left side still slowly bleeding, but Rex's pupils had not dimmed. In fact, within those deep brown eyes burned something machines could never measure, the tenacity of a K9 warrior who had already crossed through hell. As Clara administered painkillers, Emily sat close by, her small hands resting on Rex's back, her head leaning against her father's shoulder. "He'll live, right, Doctor?" "Clara?" she asked softly, voice hoarse from exhaustion and tears. Clara nodded. In her heart, she knew it was still critical. But if any creature had the strength to cross the threshold between life and death, it was Rex. Meanwhile, Travis opened his laptop. His hands trembled slightly as he inserted the final hard drive, recovered from Derek's body, into the port. The screen lit up, and encrypted files began to decode using software from an anonymous FBI cybersecurity engineer. The list unfolded. Names, dates, disappearances, and in some cases descriptions of side effects following the experiments. Many of them, soldiers, fathers, sons, vanished as if they had never existed. Another folder contained internal emails between Helix and a high-level covert task force operating under the name Project Nova Echo. Travis had no doubt anymore. This wasn't just a murder plot. It was a dense underground network where truth had been traded for power and control over the human mind. He hit send, transmitting the entire file to 3 major national newsrooms: The Washington Post, The Atlantic, and Associated Press. Each had its own trusted contact, journalists Travis had once helped protect whistleblowers. He knew if even a single spark ignited, a storm would follow. And it did. 4 hours later, the first headline hit the front page of The Washington Post. "Where did you lose your heroes?" Below it was a grainy photo, taken from the file of a veteran who had been psychologically reconditioned, captioned, "Illegal military experimentation. Testimony from the inside." Then CNN, NBC, and The Guardian. Special reports exploded like a chain reaction of outrage. Emergency broadcasts aired lists of the missing and video interviews with victims' families. Wives and mothers sobbed in front of cameras, recounting husbands who never returned from internal deployment exercises. And somewhere in the firestorm of commentary, the name Daniel Ross emerged, like a ghost rising from the ashes of betrayal and pain. In the first waves of coverage, an image of Rex, the K9 who had saved a little girl, circulated as a symbol of loyalty, a living testament that some beings never give up, even when the world turns its back on the truth. On social media, footage of Rex went viral. One photo, Rex lying beside Emily in the ambulance, her cheek pressed to his blood-stained fur, eyes closed as if in prayer, became iconic. They called him Guardian Rex, and from there, voices that had long remained silent began to speak. From Arizona, a veteran posted a video confirming he had once participated in a trauma recovery program where he was injected, isolated, and subjected to bizarre psychological exams. In Kansas, a retired military nurse revealed how medical files had been altered under orders. Confessions began piling up. At an abandoned military base in Alaska, a group of veterans pitched camp and raised a crude sign: "We're alive. We know the truth." In the clinic, Daniel sat beside Rex. The last light of day shone gently through a small window, casting a soft gold over the dog's silver coat. Rex was asleep, breathing steady, slow but firm. Emily laid a blue knit blanket over him, delicately, as if not to disturb a dream. Daniel bowed his head. "You didn't just save Emily. You saved the world from silence." Rex didn't open his eyes, but his tail moved ever so slightly, a nod from a soldier who had completed his first mission in a war that was far from over, and that war had just begun. While the alarms of mass media still echoed across the country, while veterans rose like a tide of justice sweeping the nation, in a small room behind the emergency clinic, where Rex was still under watch, Daniel quietly shook the hand of a woman. Her grip was strong and decisive, but warm with the weight of years spent enduring in silence. She was Lily Ross, Daniel's sister, and a renowned human rights attorney who had litigated cases of torture and illegal experimentation at the international level. "I've stayed silent long enough," Daniel said, voice hoarse, eyes bloodshot. "Now it's your turn." Lily nodded without ceremony. In her eyes, Daniel was no longer the broken brother who once clung to the edge of despair. He was a father who had found light in the dark, lifted by his daughter, and a dog who feared nothing. When Emily saw Lily, she smiled, a real smile. Rex even tried to lift his head, lightly brushing Lily's leg, as if recognizing a new ally had joined the fight. As always, Lily knelt, stroked Rex's head, and whispered, "Thank you, silent soldier." The battle didn't start with a gunshot. It began with a lawsuit, filed directly by Lily to the Eastern District Federal Court, demanding the urgent subpoena of Helix Dynamics and all individuals tied to Project Nova Echo, including former intelligence officers, military doctors, and certain high-ranking officials in the Department of Defense. What shook the media was that listed among the plaintiffs was Emily Ross, a 6-year-old girl in a wheelchair, the survivor of an abduction and daughter of an assassinated investigative journalist. Headlines blazed across networks: a girl, a dog, and a veteran, bringing a corporation to its knees in court. In the weeks that followed, Lily and her legal team gathered testimony from survivors, compiled a full witness list, and processed all data Travis had provided, including shady contracts, budget memos, internal emails, and falsified medical records. Clara also contributed original medical files from Daniel and other veterans subjected to psychological rehabilitation. Among the most compelling evidence was a video clip from a mission where Rex located Emily's position, recorded by a camera once mounted on his collar. It showed Rex navigating rough terrain, reacting to scents of blood and distant sounds with precision. Forensic analysts called it conclusive proof of exceptional perception and intentional action from a non-verbal species, capable of loyalty and love. Rex, once a forgotten soldier, now appeared in case files as a living witness, the soul of a movement dragging the truth back from the abyss. On the first day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Outside, hundreds of veterans and families stood at the gates, carrying signs, portraits of the missing, and one giant banner bearing Rex's photo with the words, "Justice has 4 legs and never forgets." Inside, Lily Ross stood at the podium with a calm, razor-sharp presence. Her voice was low, clear, and powerful as she declared, "My clients, a father, a soldier, and a forgotten K9, are not here for revenge. They are here for the truth, and they are not alone. Behind them stands a community silenced for too long, people who were never allowed to speak. Until now." Testimony began. Links long severed were reconnected. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras captured every face, and in a quiet corner, Emily sat in her wheelchair, hand resting on Rex, now healing, still bandaged, but eyes fixed on the witness stand. At one point, when a witness broke down recalling his nightmares, Emily leaned toward Rex and whispered, "He's like my dad, but he didn't have someone like you and me." Rex didn't bark. He simply lifted his head, moved closer, and sat still, as if in silence he had already spoken all that was needed. The trial would stretch on, more phases to come. But even on that first day, as the judge's gavel closed the hearing, the world outside had already changed. The case now bore a name echoed by every outlet, the Rex Files. Not just because of a dog who changed the course of the battle, but because his name had become a symbol of loyalty, survival, and the price of truth. And as Daniel once whispered to his daughter, justice isn't just the law. Sometimes it's in the eyes of a dog who never leaves the one they love. On the fourth day of the trial, pale sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the federal courtroom like a fragile ribbon of hope. Inside, the air was as tight as a drawn string. Lily Ross stood beside the witness stand, eyes glancing toward Daniel, whose hands were clasped tightly, gaze fixed on his daughter. Rex sat beside Emily, the fur around his belly still thinned from surgery, but his posture steady as stone. No leash, no command, only the invisible trust between a human and their dog. "We now call the next witness," the judge announced. A long pause followed as a side door opened. Emily Ross appeared, seated in a silver wheelchair, gently pushed by Lily. The girl wore a simple white dress, her hand gripping the pendant her mother had left behind. Light caught the fabric and her clear eyes, and for a moment the entire courtroom held its breath. Not because she was a child witness, but because everyone knew this little girl was the final thread binding the entire story together. She was the heart of the trial. Lily didn't speak much. She placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, whispered a few words, then stepped back. Emily rolled her wheelchair to the stand by herself. One journalist later wrote, "At that moment, every theatrical flourish of justice fell away, making room for the quiet voice of a child's truth, soft but undeniable." Emily didn't look at the judge. She didn't look at the lawyers. She looked at Rex, sitting in the front row, eyes locked on hers, as if ready to defend her should she falter. "My name is Emily Ross," she began, voice soft but clear. "I'm 6 years old. I had an accident when I was little, and I lost my mom recently." The room remained silent. No whispers, no camera clicks. All eyes stayed on the girl with neatly tied hair, strangely composed amidst all the brokenness. "But I'm not here to talk about being sad," Emily continued, lips pressing together to summon more courage. "I'm here because I want to talk about Rex." Her gaze shifted to the dog, then back to the courtroom. "I think if Rex hadn't stopped my dad that day, I wouldn't be here now." Her voice faltered slightly. "When Dad was about to do it, Rex looked at him. Just like now. He didn't bark. He just stared like he was saying, 'You still have your daughter. You can't give up.'" Lily signaled the technician. On the large screen behind the witness stand, a video played, footage from the camera mounted on Rex's collar. It showed the moment he ran to the cliff's edge, blocking Daniel from the wheelchair. Growls mixed with roaring wind, and Rex's eyes, steady, burning, unshakable, fixed on the trembling man at the edge of the abyss. A stifled sob echoed from somewhere in the back of the courtroom. Emily whispered, "When I opened my eyes, I didn't see rocks. I didn't see the cliff. I only saw his back, blocking the fall." Her small hand clutched the pendant tighter. After that, she lifted her head, eyes beginning to shimmer. "Rex led Dad back, and not long after he smelled my mom's blood. He remembered that scent, and the scent of the person who did it." The entire room froze, Emily continued, slowly, each syllable carved into the air. "I don't know who killed my mom, but Rex knows, and I trust him." On the screen, more footage played. Rex sniffing the blood-stained pendant, withdrawing from a firefight to shield Emily, and diving headfirst into the prison where she was held. No voices, no narration, just the actions of a creature born to protect, loyal to his last breath. Daniel's tears fell freely. Travis bowed his head. The judge removed his glasses, wiping the corner of one eye. Only Rex remained still, calm as if the story wasn't about him at all. As her testimony concluded, Emily looked up, eyes gleaming yet firm. "I'm not good at talking about justice, but I'm grateful Mom used to tell me bedtime stories. In those stories, the good guys keep trying. And sometimes animals know the truth better than people. Rex is like that." Applause broke out, unpermitted by courtroom protocol, but no one stopped it. Because at that moment, everyone understood. It wasn't a legal indictment, not an affidavit, but the gaze of a little girl who believed in her dog that had written the first line of this trial's final chapter. And as Emily was wheeled away from the stand, she turned to look back at Rex. "You told your story now," she whispered. Rex gently lowered his head to the floor, eyes never leaving her, peaceful but unyielding. Even before the applause from Emily's testimony had fully faded from memory, the next wave surged, driven by the documents in Travis's hands. Inside his locked briefcase lay a thick dossier, classified memos, leaked recordings, and most damning of all, a signed approval order for the psychological experiments, bearing the name General Elias Redford. His name was no mystery. To veterans of Bravo Unit, Redford was a long shadow cast over their past, a man of few words who commanded with his eyes and made you feel like a pawn in a game far beyond your grasp. Travis laid the file on the table during a closed-door hearing with Daniel's team, federal attorneys, and investigative journalists. His voice was steady, but each word was sharp as a blade. "I've confirmed it. Redford wasn't just the architect behind the special K-9 training program. He was also a silent co-founder of Helix Dynamics. He didn't run the company as CEO, but every final decision passed through him. He signed orders to delete medical records and transfer assets of soldiers listed as deceased." A journalist whispered, "So he turned the very men he trained into test subjects." Lily nodded, sliding forward a copy of the investigative report. "He once said in a closed Pentagon meeting, 'We can't wait for perfect soldiers to fall from the sky. We must forge them from nightmares.' And to do that, he used pain, loss, injury, battlefield memories to reprogram already broken minds." In one leaked video, Elias Redford, older, hair flecked with gray but eyes as cold as ever, sat in a dark conference room, gesturing toward neuropsychological charts. He didn't smile, didn't flinch. "We create weapons from people," he said. "And sometimes those weapons are a dog, a child, or a desperate father." Daniel sat still, hands gripping the armrest. Rex lay beside him, ears twitching at the familiar voice in the video. The voice of a commander no warrior forgets. When the information reached the Department of Justice, the charges were swift. General Redford was indicted on 7 federal counts: human rights violations, concealment of deaths, falsifying government records, military abuse of power, unauthorized human experimentation, money laundering via black contracts, and conspiracy to commit murder. By dawn the next day, headlines screamed across every major outlet. "War hero or Helix's monster, unmasking the network controlling America's soldiers." One photo struck the deepest chord. Rex, quiet, resting beside a sleeping Emily in her hospital bed. The peace between them stood in haunting contrast to the chaos they had survived together. The media erupted. Veterans once presumed dead began stepping forward. Some had changed names, some lived under false identities. Some had died. Others were still alive, silently bearing years of trauma. The story of Rex, the dog who refused to obey the order to push Emily over the cliff, became a symbol of humanity's resistance within a machine of cruelty. Lily immediately called for Redford's arrest and transport to the Central Investigative Headquarters. At the press briefing that day, Travis concluded, "No one is above the law, not generals, not corporations, and no one has the right to gamble with the souls of those who fought for this country." Outside the window, Rex waited for Daniel. As always, he looked up, sensing the shift in the wind. And beneath a blood-red sunset over the road to the federal courthouse, a soldier, who nearly lost everything, placed his hand on the head of his loyal dog, and whispered what the whole world now knew. "We're not victims anymore, Rex. We're the ones telling the truth now." After General Elias Redford was indicted, it seemed the entire criminal engine of Helix Dynamics would finally come to a halt. But Daniel knew, and so did Travis, that a monster bred in darkness for too long would never go down quietly. And it happened at the most auspicious time. A stream of unusual encrypted signals began to surface from a backup server in Montana, the very site Redford had once used as the original training base for Bravo Unit. A new intel leak confirmed their worst fears. Helix was preparing a final strike. The target was an underground data center containing all the evidence, the experiment logs, execution orders, and the names of those who had been erased. Michael was the first to spot the anomaly. While analyzing an encrypted map sent secretly through a secure channel by Mason, a former Helix systems technician, he uncovered a specific code string. Deepwell D3, Hour G, 0320, cleanse all. No question. It was a scheduled cleanse using high-grade explosives, and there were only a few hours left. Without hesitation, Michael set out. He knew every underground entry, every concrete bunker, every tunnel from the early decades, because he had once trained there. But this time he wasn't fighting under orders. He was fighting for the truth, and for those who died without a name. Back at the clinic, as Daniel grabbed his gear and weapon, Rex, still recovering, suddenly stood and barked sharply. Though bandages still wrapped around his side, the dog was determined to follow. Daniel knelt, locked eyes with the brown gaze he trusted more than anything, and nodded. If anyone can stop this, it has to be us. Together. Meanwhile, inside a rusting container hidden in an abandoned Nevada scrapyard, Mason, now living under an alias, prepared for his role. His face bore scars, his voice was rough and quiet, but his eyes were still sharp. He was the one who had duplicated the backup drive, hiding it inside Deepwell D3's ventilation shaft. Now, he was the only one who could disarm the detonation. "Redford picked me because I was good," Mason said over an encrypted call with Travis. "But he didn't know I had a heart. I can't save the ones we lost, but I can save the truth." Night fell like a black curtain. Michael crept past the old security fences, venturing into the maze below. Along the way, he left small glow-ink markings, a path Daniel and Rex could follow if he didn't make it out. Far ahead, Rex halted. His nose lifted toward the darkness. No sound, no movement. But he took in a long breath and let out a low growl. Daniel raised his weapon instantly. A shadow flickered across the corridor. A trap. They were being watched. Inside the Deepwell control center, a countdown bomb had already been armed. Timer. 3:12. Mason stood at a secondary console, hands trembling as he input the shutdown code. But the mainframe had been wired remotely, dual signal encrypted. He couldn't stop it unless he cracked Redford's final biometric lock. And Redford was in custody. Unless... Just then, Michael burst in, shirt soaked with sweat. He held up a small chip, a biometric keycard he had stolen from Redford's private quarters before escaping. "One shot at this," he said, fire in his voice. 3:17. Rex discovered that the northern tunnel entrance was rigged. No bark, no growl. He simply nudged Daniel toward a half-buried air duct. Daniel understood immediately. He reached down, pulled Emily from the emergency shelter pack, and whispered, "We're going home, Emily. Rex knows the way." 3:19. Mason inserted the card into the reader. Error. Michael jumped forward, manually overriding the system. Circuits buzzed. The screen went black, then flashed red, and then silence. 3 மணி 20 நிமிடம். No explosion, no collapse, only the soft rush of wind through the tunnel and the gasping breath of those who had stopped the disaster just in time. Daniel called into the system. "Mason, Michael, we saw the lights come back on. Are you all right?" "We're good," Mason rasped. "And the backup drive? It's still intact." For the first time in the entire mission, Rex raised his head and let out a single bark, full of quiet triumph. That night, the place once built to hide crimes became the very ground where Helix Dynamics' final plan was buried. And in the silence that followed, sitting in the dark with his daughter in his arms, and Rex guarding close by, Daniel felt, for the first time in years, that he was no longer running. That dawn wasn't the first time the light had touched Daniel and Emily after their long years in darkness, but it was the first time the light came from justice. Radiant, not just piercing fog, but igniting hope in the hearts of millions watching across America. After the plot at Deepwell was thwarted, all evidence had been secured. The encryption was fully cracked. Audio recordings, target lists, surveillance logs, even a video of Redford personally discussing the internal purge plan, all were submitted to federal court. This was no longer the rebellion of rogue survivors seeking truth. It had become a national reckoning. In the courtroom, under the hum of media buzz and a wall of camera lenses, Daniel sat in a newly restored military uniform. His insignia had once been stripped away for psychological instability and mission security violations. Today, he sat not only as a witness, but as a symbol of every veteran silenced by an invisible hand. Emily sat beside him, in a simple white dress, hands folded on her lap. Her eyes never left the witness stand, where Travis now stood, followed by Michael, Mason, Clara, and others, the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Attorney Lily Ross addressed the court with her signature calm but unyielding voice. "My client is not just the victim of a conspiracy. He is living proof of what happens when we allow a private entity to seize control of what should be a matter of national honor." Faced with overwhelming testimony and irrefutable evidence, the jury deliberated for less than a day. General Elias Redford, once a symbol of discipline and power, was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole on 7 federal charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, evidence tampering, and peacetime human rights violations. Derek Kane, once Daniel's brother-in-arms, now executor of Helix's dirty work, received the same sentence for his role in the assassinations. Helix Dynamics, its entire operation, financial structure, and intelligence network, was dissolved permanently. Assets were seized and redirected to a special fund for the victims of illegal experimentation. As the verdict was read aloud, Emily looked up at her father. She didn't cry, but her eyes gleamed with a strength far beyond the years stolen from her. Rex, still bandaged, stood beside her, muzzle gently resting on her knee, as if listening, understanding he too was part of this justice, even without a seat on the jury. The court delivered an extraordinary decision. Emily Ross would receive honorary inheritance and compensation from Helix's confiscated assets, on behalf of her late mother, who died in the pursuit of truth. In a gesture of overdue redemption, Daniel Ross was formally reinstated with honorary military rank and awarded the Medal of Valor for exceptional service to national security and human rights. The courtroom was silent. No cheers, no clapping, just the weight of 1,000 hearts swelling at once, an emotion too vast for words, but deeply understood by all. As if sensing the moment's gravity, Rex rose, turned to face the judge, and slowly walked down the aisle. No one stopped him. A uniformed officer stepped aside and bowed slightly to the dog, like bowing to a fellow soldier. And then the entire room stood. Moments later, Daniel knelt beside Rex, whispering into his ear, "You did it. We brought Emily back into the light." Rex nudged his head against Daniel's hand. His eyes gleamed with peace. Every scar, every chase, every drop of blood was now a memory that helped define something unshakable. What it means to be a family, what it means to be loyal, and what is truly worth protecting. Just days after the trial that shook the nation, when justice had prevailed and truth no longer hid behind curtains of power, a special ceremony was held at the Capitol. It wasn't for generals, not for politicians, but for a warrior who never once asked for anything in return. Rex, The K9 who saved a little girl, stopped a father on the edge of despair, and leaped into the line of fire without hesitation. That morning, the sky above Washington, D.C. was clear and high, flawless. The American flag danced proudly in the wind, as if it too had come to witness a new kind of history, one where a dog stood among honored guests. On stage, framed by lights, flags, and military insignias, there stood a low podium, built to match the stature of a four-legged soldier. Rex, his new scar carefully trimmed and cleaned, walked calmly between two honor guards. Beside him were Daniel, in full-dress uniform, and Emily, radiant in a white dress with small embroidered flowers, seated in her wheelchair, eyes shining. The voice over the loudspeaker rang deep and solemn. Today, for the first time in the history of the U.S. Armed Forces, a K9 is awarded the National Honor Soldier Medal, not just for bravery in combat, but for loyalty, intelligence, and unconditional love for humanity. On the giant screen above, a montage of Rex's journey played. From brutal desert missions overseas to cold-weather training grounds to that fateful cliff's edge where Daniel nearly lost everything. Clips showed Rex guiding, fighting, wounded, and finally lying silently in Emily's arms. Images that silenced the room in collective awe. After a pause, the speaker continued, voice soft but unwavering. We often speak of heroes who never abandon their comrades. But today, we must recognize some heroes don't speak, who need no medals, and yet hold the soul of a person together by merely being there. When the Pentagon representative placed the medal on Rex's collar, he didn't bark, didn't jump, didn't wag his tail. He simply stepped forward, raised his head, and inhaled the air. The light caught his white fur, casting a faint halo, the quiet radiance of devotion. Behind him, Daniel placed a hand gently on Rex's shoulder, and throughout the audience, more than a few soldiers discreetly wiped their eyes. Emily was wheeled up next. At first, she said nothing. She simply threw her arms around Rex's neck, burying her face in his thick fur. Then, as the cameras held and the room waited, she looked up, her eyes glowing. He doesn't talk, she began, but he knows everything. He knew who hurt my mom. He knew when my dad had lost hope, and he knew I needed to be saved. He's my hero. No words are needed, just being there. Applause erupted. But it wasn't loud or chaotic. It was heartbeat applause, the kind that comes from something deeper than admiration. It was a standing ovation for a being who had transcended species to become a living emblem of love, courage, and hope. One television broadcast flashed a simple caption, Rex, America's dog. And from that moment on, Rex no longer belonged just to Daniel or to Emily. He became a companion for anyone who had ever been broken, who had lost faith, and who now needed a reason to go on. Daniel leaned down and whispered to his daughter, We owe him everything. Emily nodded, a soft smile on her lips. And we'll repay him with happiness, right, Dad? Rex sat between them, head high but eyes gentle, a sentinel who never slept, a warrior without weapons, an angel in the form of a loyal dog. After a ceremony that touched the heart of a nation, as the stage lights dimmed and the media quieted, Daniel didn't return to the old life. He understood, with Rex by his side, that they had walked to the edge of pain. And from that edge, there was only one way forward, to build something meaningful, not just for themselves, but for others who had been broken like them. And so, on a crisp early autumn morning, as the first leaves began to turn gold, Guardian Fields officially opened, a training and therapy center for canine dogs and disabled children, nestled peacefully in the Virginia countryside. The name came from what Rex had always been, Guardian, a protector. The wooden gates opened between rows of trees, leading into a serene space where distant barks blended with the laughter of children. In the center, wooden buildings built with community support stood welcoming and fully accessible. To the left, spacious kennels offered rest for the trained dogs. To the right, a therapy wing, where Clara and a team of volunteer medical staff worked daily to heal wounds that couldn't be seen. Emily was the first student. She arrived in a wheelchair newly decorated with horse and dog patterns. Behind her walked Rex, slower now, but just as regal. She learned to signal with her hands, to train a new dog with only her eyes, and to lead instead of follow. Soon, other children came, each carrying their own scars, nightmares, and fragile steps. And one by one, their eyes began to brighten as they walked beside their four-legged guardians. Rex wasn't just a symbol. He was a teacher. Young dogs trained in his image learned patience, discipline, and above all, pure, wordless love for people. They didn't need commands to know when a child was afraid. All it took was a glance, a trembling breath, or a single hand twitch. And they would press close, head on the child's knee, still and sure, saying, "You're not alone." Daniel worked quietly in the training field. But every step was lighter now. He was no longer a soldier drowning in the past. He was a mentor, passing on the lessons of loyalty, purpose, and rebirth. Clara was the quiet soul of the center. She treated wounds and listened to fears from children and former military dogs once abandoned after service. Every morning, she and Emily walked the kennels, checking on their four-legged students like doctors of both body and heart. Lily, Daniel's sister, didn't stay at the center, but she remained its anchor. In her small Washington office, she worked tirelessly to reopen the case files of veterans psychologically abused in Helix's trials. Lawsuits were filed. Forgotten soldiers were finally given a voice. And Lily carried that voice forward, with wisdom, fire, and the legacy her family had paid so dearly for. One golden afternoon, as sunlight poured across the wooden porch, Emily sat beside Daniel under a maple tree. She drew a picture, Rex guiding a young boy across a small wooden bridge. Daniel smiled and rested a hand on her shoulder, overcome by a gentle peace. No more gunfire, no more cliffs. Only the sound of children's footsteps mingling with soft paws falls across the dirt, the sound of a new life born from what was once darkness. Rex, lying on the far side of the yard, gently lifted his head, as if he knew that something had come full circle. Then he lay back down, his brown eyes glimmering with a strange, quiet peace, as if he understood. The mission wasn't over, but the journey had entered a new chapter, a chapter of light. Morning light filtered gently through the leaves, casting golden streaks across the stone courtyard behind the wooden lodge. There was nothing particularly special about that morning. No sirens, no gunfire, no urgent calls. Just the soft stillness of a new day unfolding through steady breaths and quiet peace. But within that simplicity, something miraculous was happening. Emily sat in her wheelchair in the middle of the courtyard, a pale pink shawl draped loosely around her shoulders. In her lap was a book about the stars, the same one her mother used to read to her every night. Her lips moved softly, reciting lines under her breath as if she were reading them to someone unseen. Beside her lay Rex, the K9 who had taken a bullet for her, broken chains to drag her from captivity, and sniffed out lies through blood and instinct. Today, Rex was curled quietly at her feet, his head resting against the wheel, eyes half shut but ears twitching with every breeze that passed. Emily tilted her head toward him and whispered, voice barely louder than the wind, "You know, if you hadn't been there that day, I think I would have flown away." Rex opened his eyes and raised his head just slightly. He didn't move much, only gazed at her with the quiet depth of a soul that had walked through hell and made it back. "But now," she added, eyes turning upward, "I'm flying differently. No legs are needed to fly, no need to leave the ground to touch dreams once thought impossible." Rex understood that, not in words, but in his heart. He had witnessed her journey, from silent stillness in a darkened room to spinning joyfully across the training field, her laughter ringing like silver bells. A breeze flipped a page of her book, revealing the Orion constellation, her favorite. She looked up into the still brightening sky. "Mom used to say Orion was the hunter who protected children's dreams," she said. "But I think it's you. You're my Orion, Rex." The dog shifted slightly, pressing his head against her knee. No bark, no movement for attention. Just the steady presence of someone who understood that the greatest love doesn't shout. It simply stays. From afar, Daniel walked the training grounds with a small group of young trainees. He paused when he spotted Emily and Rex from a distance. For a moment, he no longer saw the wheelchair. He no longer saw the blood-soaked past or the nights of unspeakable grief. All he saw was light falling on Emily's dark hair and the snowy fur of Rex. Scarred but soft. Proof that those who survive the worst still carry the power to heal. Daniel turned away, letting Emily and Rex remain in their small, sacred world. A world of quiet, ordinary moments that had become extraordinary. He knew this was what his wife had once wished for. A morning where their daughter could read in peace, a dog could rest without fear, and a soldier could stand without armor. Nearby, Clara was watering the plants, and Lily had just closed another case file for a veteran seeking justice. No one said much. The whole center brimmed with something rare. Faith in tomorrow. Emily looked up once more. The sky was so clear that she imagined she could almost see her mother smiling through the stars. She closed the book, bowed her head slightly, and whispered, "I'll fly high, Mom, but not alone, because I have Rex." And Rex, as if he understood every word, let out a soft, low sound. Not a warning, not a demand, just a gentle reply that he was still there, and always would be, on every calm morning, even in storms yet to come. That day, the sky was bluer than ever, as if it too wanted to be part of something special. On the wide field in front of the Hope's Path K-9 Center, people had gathered from near and far. Veterans, children with disabilities, journalists, doctors, and those who once spoke when no one else dared. The American flag waved in the breeze, and at the center of it all stood a simple wooden stage adorned with a blue ribbon, the color of loyalty. Emily Ross, now 7, sat in her wheelchair wrapped in wildflower garlands. Her hair was neatly tied back. Her white dress looked like it belonged at graduation, but her eyes carried a depth far beyond her years. Beside her, Rex stood quietly, a living statue. His once white fur was now streaked with gray, and his old wounds had dulled with time, but his gaze remained as clear and faithful as ever. The mic buzzed softly as Emily adjusted it. The outdoor crowd went silent. No phones, no chatter, just reverence and waiting eyes. Her voice rang out, soft but sure. "Someone once asked me, 'Do you still have any family?'" She paused, fingers tightening on the armrest. "The day my mom died, I thought no." All attention turned toward her. "And then my dad sort of disappeared too. But someone never left, never walked away. Not once." She turned to Rex. She didn't say his name, just nodded. Rex stepped forward, placing his head gently on her hand. The gesture drew a quiet gasp. Somewhere in the crowd, someone sniffled. "I realized family isn't where you come from. It's where you're saved." Her voice softened, but the conviction stayed. "He doesn't have wings. He doesn't speak. But he flew with me. Through the dark, through the gunfire, through the pain." Rex stood there, a soldier in peacetime. No longer just a symbol of loyalty, but the living witness to everything good a heart can carry, even after war, betrayal, and loss. Travis sat in the front row, eyes glistening. Lily placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Clara smiled faintly, then stepped back toward a group of children stroking young K-9 born and raised from this very center. Michael, as always, stayed in the shadows, nodding silently. Rex lifted his head toward the camera. In his eyes was something deep, as if he knew the story wasn't just a memory, but a message, a living testimony of loyalty, unspoken love, and the quiet kind of light that shatters even the thickest dark. The music swelled, slow, rich with the echoes of a journey not just of a man, but of a dog, a silent warrior. The screen began to fade to black. Images dissolved into stillness. And then came the final words, written in white, based on a true story of loyalty and love that rose beyond the shadows. Thank you for believing that. Some angels don't need wings to fly. They only need someone to believe in them, with their heart. When night seems to close in, there's always one soul that refuses to let go. A dog who cannot speak, but shouts with every action, "Don't fall, I'm still here." The story of Daniel, Emily, and Rex is not just about war, conspiracy, or betrayal. It's a symphony of loyalty, a testament to love's power to heal, even when it comes from a soul who cannot speak but always understands. Now we ask you, if one dog could save a family from despair, do you believe that love from an animal could change your life too? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stories where light defeats darkness, like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another journey of healing. Thank you for being part of ours. See you in the next story.